Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist here with you, and want to give the common disclaimer that this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes. This does not constitute working with a mental health professional. Please seek one out in your area. And, if there's not one in your immediate area, be open to looking at telehealth, because there is somebody probably in your entire state that can solve being able to provide you with services. So we have our, if you listen to a couple of our other episodes, we were talking with David Khalili, and he's back again. And this time, this is also for our Pride Month series of recordings. And we're going to be talking about LGBT issues, and especially interracial LGBT issues, and when it comes to relationships. So I'm going to give you the abbreviated reminder of David's background if you haven't heard the other ones, but David Khalili is a licensed marriage and family therapist, board-certified sexologist focusing on working with men, couples therapy, and multi-ethnic individuals. He founded Rouse Relational Wellness in 2021 in order to address shame and anxiety that show up all too often in sex and relationships. He received his master's degree in counseling and psychology from Golden Gate University and a master's degree in sexuality studies in San Francisco State University, where his work focused on Middle Eastern queer folks, kink, and trauma. He also specializes in multi-heritage couples, and those who immigrated recently are first-generation Americans. So welcome back, David.
Thank you very much, Perry. It's great to be here.
No problem. And this time, rather than screw up your name, I screwed up your bio.
No worries. I wrote a long one.
Not a problem. So in this case, as the standard question is, how did we get here standpoint, I'm kind of curious then, how did you get here in this relationship to this topic about dealing with LGBT relationships, especially when we're dealing with multi-ethnic relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. So big things are, this is very much very tied to my heart and to my lived experience. I'm queer and third culture kid or first generation American born. Very much have experienced what it's like to be in liminal spaces throughout my life. My dad was from Iran, and my mom is from Austria. And many times in my life, I was told that I wasn't Persian enough, I wasn't American enough, I wasn't Austrian enough. So I was like, well, what am I? I've also liked people of all genders. And so I've been told that I'm not gay enough, I'm not straight enough, I'm not queer enough. And so again, what am I? And in my process through working to become a therapist, I started to really resonate with clients that understandably matched that experience. And then matching couples or partnerships where either one partner had that experience or it was kind of alive in that dynamic where they held different areas of lived experiences and there was kind of like this liminal space in between them and they're trying to make a connection in that space. But they keep missing each other somehow, or at least missing in those moments. And so, we can take our personal work and make it work. And it's been really kind of a really lovely experience to see what it's like to work with couples around this, both around issues around coming out. Maybe there's different areas of being in the coming out process for various reasons, or they're coming from very different cultures, not just different countries. And I like to delightfully call it a multicultural explosion that happens in the relationship. And so just to kind of create some space for that going to happen, and we're going to work on it. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a part of this young David that was working, with his mom and dad as their multicultural explosion happened in their partnership. And lots of fights around Persian time. Persian time is a very late time, especially compared to Austrian time.
Well, it's that classic standpoint of POC time or any personal time. Very different than anything that came out of Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. So, where would you like to begin on this? Maybe we should start by giving some more definition of terms so that everyone knows what we're talking about.
Yeah. What terms stand out to you is what should be good to start with.
So, we want to make very clear that this applies to all lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer individuals in any form of relationship with somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Not just the aspect of multi-ethnic, because we can also, another standpoint of culture can be religion.
Yeah.
Well, another standpoint of culture can be just where you grew up in relationship to, even if you're from the same country, where did you grow up in relationship there? Did someone grow up much more in a mountain cold environment versus off the shore where it was bright, sunny, and warm?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there can be those type of cultures. And I know I like to also say when we're talking about culture, every family is its own culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've heard there's a reason why I use multi-ethnic or multi-heritage, and it's to give respect to the term of interracial, because I've often heard interracial, and I think of interracial very much as black and white, especially in the States. And then I consider other relationships multi-heritage or multicultural. I don't know if that's incorrect or causing more of a divide, but it's felt like.
Well, let's be frank. Some of that is probably clearly based in the idea of a divide, since most quickly when that term interracial came up, those who created it were mainly thinking of black and white, not what does it mean for a white person to end up with Mexican or an Asian or so forth. I mean, consider the history of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz.
Right. Yeah.
Just the amount of flack that they got being a multi-ethnic couple.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the time frame when they were born, or when they were popular characters.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are. I was just listening to a podcast about that, and just the amount of press and work that was done to kind of cover that up or to kind of whitewash it in certain ways.
Even though it was also one of the major themes in their television show.
Yeah. 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 What other terms? I'm trying to think.
Well, the other one I think maybe, and some of the stuff what we're going to be talking about, is also the idea of power dynamics. How do we understand what power dynamics are going on in the relationship? Because there's also not just the standpoint of what might be financial. There's also even this aspect of dealing with immigration.
Yeah.
How many relationships also have been for that lovely little subject of someone getting a green card?
Yep.
Both either out of true love or an arrangement.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is an incredible power dynamic, and one thing that I often think about working with couples or partnerships is that power differential, and who either has the upper hand or believes and is talking to their partner as if they have the upper hand, and vice versa. And very much that not just immigration status, but also is, like you're saying, the green card holder, or the marriage is maintaining the green card. And so even if it is a very loving couple, that is still very much a power dynamic that is at play. And I've unfortunately witnessed it both personally and professionally, of it, being used in manipulative ways.
And doesn't just end there, even the aspect of intimate partner violence.
Yeah.
Again, this sort of the binary notion that it's usually only male and female is like, no, intimate partner violence happens between same-gender loving couples. And especially when we bring in the multi-ethnics aspect of it, how is interpersonal violence also either being sadly permitted, seen as normalized?
Yeah.
And that even goes not just from physical damage to emotional damage.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And we at Rouse, we have a group that's forming for survivors of intimate partner violence, because we want to make sure that there's those safe enough spaces to process that and work through the trauma of those experiences. But yeah, I mean, being able to reach out for help during those abusive moments, if you are of a different immigration status, it's very complicated, and you have to trust on the system that, it's going to work in your favor.
Which also depends on the heritage you've had with the system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So for folks, that would probably be some of the terms we'll be bouncing back and forth with and going off in the different tangents on.
Yeah. And going off of that piece, I think, something that I've worked a lot around, especially within gay male partnerships, is that racial or ethnic power dynamic that comes at play, especially around immigration status and kind of the white partner looking down at their other partner as, either in this pitying way or this patronizing way or in a contemptuous way of like, well, they don't know the language or they don't know the culture. And it can range from very subtle to very explicit. And I very much, this is stating the obvious, but as a couples therapist, I think it's important to really highlight those differences when they show up so you're not reifying the damages. But I'm in the Castro and we see quite a bit of, a lot of eroticizing of Asian men in lots of ways. And, I talk to gay Asian men who have this split feeling around it of, there's a way where some of them will like the attention and some of them will hate it because it's like this double-edged sword. And they're not, they know that they're not being, for some, they know that in some cases that the men that are looking at them are not looking at them as a person, but what they represent and what they think, they represent.
And as a Black man, I'm very much aware of that same aspect too. It's in that, and there are those who really look at me, and then there's those who love that idea, and it's just like, if you love the idea, don't be surprised when I'm walking away, not paying much attention.
Exactly. Yep. Not unless you're asking me questions about me, who I am, and
Yeah. Sadly, I remember an incident that happened a few years ago with my leather club, where this clearly drunk white guy was hitting on one of my brothers, and he had walked up to him and said, I'm frightened of you, but I'm really attracted to you. And my leather brother, I could definitely see, was massively uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much, and he wasn't really, it wasn't he, in this drunk guy's mind, it was a flattering comment, but it wasn't landing. No. And I think my brother said, well, then why are you here talking to me? And that's about the point where I stepped up and was like, is everything all right over here?
Yeah.
And the guy basically says, I'm just trying to have a fun time. It's like, I said to him, it's like, I just want to make sure everyone's practicing consent here.
Yeah. That's a good line. Yeah. Yeah. I really think it's an unfortunate reality of very much a scanning of, what are your purposes here? Why are you talking to me? Or, is it the objectivization? Is it the fetishization? Or do you want to get to know me?
Yeah. And one of those other areas then too, with this power dynamic comes up the aspect as things have been happening lately in this country, because right now we're recording this in January, and this is going to be hearing in June. The aspect of what does it mean for the idea of someone who's immigrated and is LGBT? Can they go home again? And there's a whole push to go home for some.
Yeah. Yeah. And where my dad came from, Iran, I actually have not been, but, let's say I was born there. I couldn't go back to Iran. Iran wouldn't be home because of a queer Middle Eastern man or, multi-ethnic man with heritage in the Middle East. I would be declared a Persian citizen once I arrived, and then I would be upheld to those laws and regulations within Iran. Because my father was a Persian citizen, I would be declared a Persian citizen. And then, and right now it's all good there. But I hope to go one day. I hope that, what is happening in Iran, as unfortunate and as deadly as it is, I hope it doesn't stop, because it feels like it's gaining traction and that there will be, a revolution of some sort, hopefully. And then there could be more openness and more, justice and love in Iran.
which then also, again, becomes a power dynamic that some partners can exploit.
Yeah. If it feels appropriate, there's a wonderful documentary about trans folks in Iran called "Be Like Others" that we could talk about. It's specific to Iran, but it's a really beautiful but devastating documentary from the mid-aughts. I want to say it was on HBO, called "Be Like Others," and it was looking at transgender affirming surgery that is occurring in Iran, and it's actually government funded, and it's been government funded since the early 80s. And if you look at it just quickly, you think, oh, that's a really interesting kind of progressiveness that this country is having to have the government pay for gender affirming surgeries. And what they say is that in the actual laws, it says that when this happens, when a person is transgender, it is a quote unquote a mistake made by God, and the Islamic Republic is offering a path to correct that mistake, which is really fascinating because they're admitting that God is making a mistake, which A, that's not a mistake, but B, they say that God makes mistakes. And B, what it actually is it's not for people to actually have gender affirming surgery, but it's to reduce the actual presence of queer folks. It's to straighten them out, essentially. And when you get to the end of the documentary, they interview some people and they say, if you didn't live in Iran, would you have this surgery? And the majority of them said no. And they were just doing it to stay in their partnership or to stay living with their family. And so when I presented this documentary to colleagues and talked about this with people, a lot of the questions were understandable outrage, rightfully so. But it was met with this: why don't they just leave the country? Why don't they just go anywhere? Why kind of this exasperation, almost kind of a contempt towards the people that are staying there. And that's you make it sound so easy when you put it that way, but you're leaving the person that would be doing that would be leaving so much, especially coming from that culture, to turn away in that way. Like, yes, they would be going into their own self and their own lived experience and integration, but it's not that easy of a decision. And I think that when we're sitting with these clients who are holding the severity of this in a way where we don't, if you haven't lived it, you can't fully understand. You have to at least give them that opportunity to have you believe it. I'm thinking about some supervision that I've been doing this last couple of weeks, where I'm trying to think of how much I can share. Essentially, sitting with a client where you have a different level of privilege and lived experience, and realizing, wow, this is heavy, and I have to really be serious about this. And, while there might be overlap with different cultures, you really do have to understand the severity of some of these people's experiences, that it is actual life and death, and it is actual connection or disconnection from family. So to just say, step into your own, come out, be wonderful, be your amazing self, you're really showing your true colors to show that you don't understand the cultural significance of this decision.
And then also the power privilege that comes in the aspect of, oh yeah, I can just go anywhere else in the world.
Right.
And I will automatically be comfortable.
Yeah.
It
right.
sort of comes up with the aspect. Yeah, we'll be welcome. We'll be comfortable, which goes with the issue in some cases about let's just say the expat status, which is, yeah, you're going to go off and live in another country, but you're not giving up your U.S. citizenship.
Yep.
You're not actually technically becoming part of that country, you're just
right.
And how often does that become part of that mechanism that gets instability in the relationship?
Right. Becomes used, or becomes part of it.
Exactly. Equally on that standpoint, I know as we were talking before this episode, how does this aspect of also respecting the other partner's culture play out in either tearing the relationship apart or building greater bridges within the relationship? Yeah. So can you say something more about that?
Yeah, and it's funny because, it was my father passed away 10 years ago, and it was just his birthday, so he's very fresh on my mind. But You're saying that, and it's making me reflect on my parents' relationship where, my dad was Muslim, my mom was Catholic, but my dad celebrated Christmas with my mom because she saw it as, she really enjoyed it. And my mom celebrated Persian New Year with my dad because that is the best holiday that there ever was in my mind. But they, we would talk to each other, and people would ask them, they would ask my dad, why didn't you make her convert? That was the phrasing, make her convert. And my dad was always just like, she's not interested. I didn't make her. She makes her own decisions. I don't know. It's not my. And I always appreciated his answer to that. Was always like, it's not my role to make her do anything. Mm-hmm. And it really helped me hold and understand the strength of these types of relationships. That yes, as we're talking about, there can be many difficulties in miscommunications, but there's a lot of beautiful foundational building that can be done if there is communication and if there is respect and love and care, where they can really build off of each other's, because Austrian and Persian are very different, but I feel like I've, held some good things. There's still some Catholic guilt in me that I'm trying to work on, but
yeah. But that become for other forms of it, such as what does it mean for someone to learn to cook their partner's favorite food and of their ethnic culture? What does it actually mean that you're actually studying your partner's cultural history?
Yeah.
To know how it influenced where they came from, what are some of the choices their family made, let alone learning their language, trying, even if you're always going to be a bit broken, to learn their language.
Right. Yeah. And it's the way that you said that, even if it's a bit broken, it's about that process. It's about the journey. It's signaling what you're doing. It's not about the outcome of being, perfect Persian or German or whatever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And those are all many ways to show connection with your partner.
Yeah.
But then we also know how this also shows up in disconnection. So can we talk a bit more about that one-upmanship from the standpoint, from the stuff you've seen in working with couples?
Yeah. And then from the cultural immigration standpoint, it's very much it can even be kind of quiet and insidious, like this, like a laugh of like, well, Bob just doesn't understand. And it's almost like a pat on the head. And that it can seem as considerate or loving and understanding or accepting maybe, but it's not. It's, it is very much a top-down sort of view. And, are you trying to force your partner to assimilate, or are you trying to help them, kind of join them in their own journey of what they want to, acculturate to and integrate or not? And then I've talked to partnerships where one partner barely speaks English, and I'm pretty sure that was the same for my parents. But on that alone, it's not bad. But what do they see in that, or is there a pattern in that? And so if you talk to people who they often date men, or they date other partners who can't speak English as well, or they don't speak their language as well, there is something interesting about that difference or in that dynamic. Again, it's not a make or break, or it's only one piece of information. But if you're living in a country that English is the predominant language and your partner doesn't, you're really making them rely on you for lots of things, especially if you're not trying to encourage expansion of communication in either direction.
Which, sadly, and having to go back to the aspect of the partner violence in the classic horror stories, we hear about the mail order brides.
Yeah, right. And indentured servitude almost, right? Where they come to the country and then they take their passport away in lots of ways. And that's happened to many family members of mine in work situations where they come to the States and then their employer is saying, great, I'll take this. That happened more so in the 80s, 70s and 80s. Yeah.
And some might say also happening with a certain bird app as well.
Yeah, right. That one.
Right. But then that standpoint of what does it look like when that happens with a same-sex relationship?
hmm And then having to go through the multiple layers of discrimination or stigma that may or is occurring at the various levels of the institutions that they have to interact with, where criminal institution, immigration institution,
Mhm.
financial justice, lots of things, where the person who has the citizenship or looks like the majority of the people in the country, they're going to have the power and privilege, and the people in authority are going to believe them over the other partner.
Mhm. Hmm. Yeah. So, I think that's probably a good place for us to take a break and just let that all sink in,
Yeah.
to sink in there before we go on to our second half here. So, I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with David Khalili, licensed marriage and family therapist. And this is Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. So stay tuned for our second half. We'll be back shortly, folks.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information. You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with David Khalili, licensed marriage and family therapist. And we're going to continue our talk about LGBT and multi-ethnic relationships. I know we kind of ended on a kind of a heavier note at the end of our other section, but let's talk about a bit about, and sort of wrap some more of that up and move into some lighter stuff. What do you think also comes up with what's known as IFS, which is internal family systems work when it comes to this place between not just dealing with our identities as from our ethnicities, but also our sexualities as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's making me think also about my my thesis in the sexuality studies, where I talked about Middle Eastern queer folks and intersecting identity conflict. And the idea behind intersecting identity conflict is that we all hold multiple identities, but for some folks, certain identities conflict with each other, like Middle Eastern and queer.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this belief or this view that we have of people as like one whole person rather than a sum of our parts.
Mm.
And by being able to talk about ourselves or about our interests, our desires, our emotions as parts of ourselves, this helps work through shame and anxiety in lots of ways, because then we don't have to defend our whole being. We can make mistakes. It can be okay. We can have these parts of ourselves that we're not so thrilled about, or parts of ourselves that we are.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes what happens when couples therapy start or relationships therapy start is they may have waited quite a while to come to therapy, or there may have been this kind of event that happened that brings them in, and they're coming in very activated and probably a bit defended, one or both partners. And they may be thinking, oh shit, this therapist is going to tell me that I'm the wrong one, or my partner thinks I'm the wrong one, or everyone thinks I'm the wrong one, or they're the wrong one. And in reality, we as therapists aren't looking at who's the right one, wrong one, unless there's a significant power differential or a significant abuse situation, of course. But majority of the times we're looking at parts of people. And so we're really wanting to cultivate a safe enough space where those parts can talk to each other, both within an individual and also between partners. And I find that can be a really good way to also teach that type of communication to couples to take home with them, because then it becomes not so much of an all or nothing argument or discussion, and the stakes get a little bit lower or more appropriate or aligned, I guess.
Well, I think that in some regards, as general, is that anytime since a situation is going on, it's not always about logic.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, a lot of things aren't about logic. There are a lot more things about emotions.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get wrapped up in your emotions and forget that there is someone else who may or may not be connecting with their emotions in relation to yours.
Right. And then
it's in the defensiveness you're talking about.
Yeah. I often talk to couples and folks just about how we are tuning forks to other people. And, the more emotionally closer you are to a person, the more your tuning fork is going to resonate from them. And so to kind of also witness that you may just be reacting to them, and may not be, like you said, like a logical thought. It may just be a stimulus, a response to a stimulus.
Yeah, because I think and that doesn't just stop with relationships, but also go intimate part. Yeah, doesn't just stop with husband and husband or spouse and spouse. It also goes with the kids too.
Yeah,
it also goes with, in some ways, it also goes to your work environment too. I mean, really, how many of us willingly and openly do not feel like we need to defend ourselves when we're called stupid? And even if their intention is not to call us stupid, how have the wordings been used?
Yeah,
we've built a definition that's maybe very different, especially when we bring in the language standpoint. That isn't translating just because we both speak English.
Right. And I think there's a way where language can be used against someone in this way where they're not even aware that it's being used against them, especially if it's their foreign language. And, then that power and privilege is used in that way.
Or even the other fact there too is the standpoint is, I know for an encounter I had it was a different work related thing. And this woman was of Asian ancestry, was upset that I wasn't understanding her. And she's saying, I'm speaking perfect English. And I'm sort of mentally looking, it's like, yeah, you're speaking perfect English. Problem isn't that it's what you're speaking, it's what you're enunciating. I'm having trouble understanding your enunciation. Right. And how that enunciation can be used as a sign of someone being, say, ignorant, or it's becoming part of that mechanism that's saying, I don't understand you.
Yeah. And then it becomes used against them. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then there's this entire imperialist notion of English as like the first language. I mean, just, the whole ESL industry, the fact that it's called English as a second language is a really funny misnomer, because the majority of the people that come to the States, English is their fourth or fifth language that they've learned, by the time they get here. But it becomes this thing that, English has to be the primary language of the entire world.
Which gets into that power dynamic element we were talking about earlier.
Right. Yeah. But, the couples that we work with, the majority of the time, that's helping them really just kind of communicate to each other and actually listen to each other, and not just wait for the next rebuttal or whatever to defend or protect their part. Yeah.
As the saying goes, are you listening to reply or are you listening to understand?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
And we need to be spending more time listening to understand, which just, again, brings us back to the aspect of communication. And as I was telling my story earlier about with my leather club and so forth, and I said, my biggest concern is making sure everyone here is following that rule of consent.
Yep.
Consent requires communication.
Yeah. And with having that much practice with communication around consent and likes and dislikes and red, yellow, green lights, whatever your framing is, people in the kink and queer and poly community have a lot of practice, and it's not that they're better people, but they've practiced that skill more often and more regularly, and for a variety of reasons, they've worked through the stigma around talking about sex directly, or talking about feelings directly, or needs directly. Especially men and men of color who have been told to not talk about needs, not talk about emotions, not talk about who they are, or other than just what they can conquer or what they can accomplish,
or the idea that what they can be the trophy of. Yes,
right. To go to the objectification and fetishization. Are you interested in this person because of who they are or what they're representing? But yeah, the practice of communicating around consent and checking in and can really, really help with that communication level. And working with kinky and poly couples who have done a lot of work around that prior to coming into therapy, I often will know that they have that baseline of verbiage or linguistics to work from, to talk about their attachment style or talk about their needs, or that it's actually okay to state your need and that it doesn't come across as weak or it doesn't because your partner can't read your mind, it doesn't mean that your relationship is less than.
That I think is one of the big issues is that for some reason couples think that the other member of their party should be able to read their mind.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Right. Codependency, maybe? I don't know.
Well, because there's a standpoint as kids, we eventually realize our parents can't read with our minds, which is also, and when there's that sort of mind-blowing thing, and especially when they realize you told a lie and you got away with it, and your parents, or that your parents didn't understand that you really, 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 really wanted the Power Ranger that was blue, and yet they got you the yellow. Nothing wrong with the yellow one. I'm just going to be.
Yeah.
But that standpoint, why is it with couples that there's this sudden reignition of this idea that someone else is supposed to be able to read your mind?
Right. Yeah. And that if they don't, then it's like, oh God, we're doomed. This means something significantly harmful or bad about our relationship. I think it also plays into this factor or this belief that you give your partner an orgasm. And I've seen this across gender lines and sexual identities. But it definitely shows up in straight relationships for sure, where you give your partner an orgasm rather than your partner knowing what they like and don't like and how they can get themselves off and then guiding you that way, or you collaborate together to create scene or whatever it might be. If you can but by having the open communication about sex and likes and dislikes, then there's no giving, it's working together. And,
which can again come back to the power dynamics standpoint.
Right. Yeah, my mind's going to like the different types of tops and service tops and all that, but that's going into the weeds a little bit. But
we go in the weeds, but that standpoint of not just so much the idea of who's servicing who, but it's that standpoint of there has to be a established outcome to the sex, let alone established outcome to the roles that are played there.
Right. Yeah, and young early undergrad David sitting at SF State listening to Carol Queen, who was one of the beginning people of Good Vibrations, talk about just because a top meets the bottom doesn't mean that they're going to align immediately, or just because a sadist meets the masochist doesn't mean they're going to align immediately. There's so many beautiful variations within that spectrum. And that's where communication comes into play. What type of top are you? What type of bottom are you? What are you into? What are you not into? Kink is a wild, wonderful umbrella, and you get to discover what you enjoy and what your partners enjoy. But you have to have that consent and communication to kind of lubricate the process, as it were.
To that end, then what do you find in your experience, what do you find with LGBT relationships when it comes to kink and the multi-ethnic standpoint? How is kink either blending, not blending? multiplying with these type of relationships.
How is it multiplying? Like how?
Because as we talked about earlier, the standpoint of, okay, for some, they can't go back to their where they've come from because of just the idea of identifying kink. So then what happens then too, when we're looking at they're now here, they've got an entirely new sense of freedom and they're working on connecting themselves and they find kink.
I don't know. I mean, this is maybe biased, but as someone who is in the kink community and loves the kink community, I do feel like there is a form of like actualization or integration that happens, if they're able to enter into the kink community in a way where they feel respected and seen, that there is this agency that takes place of then they can say what they like, what they don't like, they can have that kind of communication. And then they're in this space where, I think one of the things I like about kink is that given the, subculture within kink, it can be a really accepting and wonderful place. And you can be whoever you are. And so I think I've seen people who have immigrated then feel really welcomed and warm in a kink community. Again, as long as they're not fetishized or objectified.
And there then becomes that aspect of how long before they can recognize the difference between being actually accepted versus the objectification.
Yeah. And to the folks who are objectifying, like really investigate what is it about that culture, that race, that background, that image that you are objectifying, and what have you projected onto it that you feel like you're gonna get, is it the warm Japanese culture of togetherness that you saw in anime that you're trying to get from dating Asian men? What is it? Really investigate that and don't just accept it as I just like Black men or I just like Asian men. Really, there's work to do.
Yeah, it's not just, oh, I like it, and therefore I mean, that's essentially, no offense, what happens with a child. You're now quote unquote adult. Yes, you have your influence of your inner child.
Yeah.
But now you also can get the chance to give it language, substance, and reality more than I just like the Blue Ranger.
Right. Yeah.
Because ultimately I like blue. Not because of any of the other colors of Power Rangers. So
right. Yeah. For a second I was hoping that you were looking off at your collection of Power Rangers that you had over there.
No, I'm at the office today, so I don't have much of my collection here.
Yeah.
Even though, let's be frank, when Power Rangers came to the US, the first queer Ranger was the Blue Ranger.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a show that I watched every day after class. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And so do I. It sort of filled my, when I was missing the Voltron vibes.
Yeah.
I'm an 80s kid, so I grew up with Voltron and Robotech as some of my first anime and so forth I started watching. So
yeah. Perfect.
All righty. So, David, if folks want to talk with you or get your services, where can they find you?
Yeah, I run Rouse Relational Wellness in San Francisco, California. We serve folks in person in the Bay Area or online, as you were mentioning earlier, over tele in the state of California. We have a number of clinicians here who focus on various aspects of sex and relationship therapy, and we run groups around sex and relationship therapy. So you can check us out at rousetherapy.com or at rousetherapy on different social media channels.
All righty. So I'll have some of that information in the show notes. So I hope you folks have been enjoying your Pride Month. And I think this is probably going to be the episode that we kick off Pride Month with and go from there. So I want to wish you a happy and safe Pride. And we'll be back for more, folks. Have a good one.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.